I rise to speak on the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Bill and to support the amendment and to, depending upon the success of the amendment, support the legislation, which is largely technical in nature. As the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act 1975 currently stands, there's a sunset clause which has the effect of revoking plans of management where those regulations which give those plans effect are repealed. The changes proposed by this bill are designed to prevent this automatic revocation, and they do not have any further consequences for policy or for the budget of the authority. Of course, plans of management are one practical tool we use to protect and support the reef. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, the world's largest coral reef ecosystem, currently has 4 plans of management in place. They operate in Cairns, Hinchinbrook Island, Shoalwater Bay and the Whitsundays. Plans of management assist with the implementation of ecologically sustainable practices and effective environmental management, especially for at-risk or vulnerable species and ecosystems in need of protection. But of course, the Great Barrier Reef requires much more than this, with experts holding grave fears about its future lifespan. In an address to the University of Queensland, the United States President, Barack Obama, had this to say: "The incredible natural glory of the Great Barrier Reef is threatened. I want to come back, and I want my daughters to be able to come back, and I want them to be able to bring their daughters or sons to visit. And I want that there 50 years from now." I think it says something about the iconic nature of the Great Barrier Reef that the then US President Obama went out of his way to ensure that he visited Queensland to give an important speech about the reef, about climate change and about the important responsibility that we have as a generation to future generations. Of course, we on this side of the House are determined to take action on climate change and determined to ensure that the Great Barrier Reef continues to be an extraordinary part of Australia's national landscape. It is indeed a national icon, but also an international piece of natural environment that is incredibly significant. It has been recognised as one of the 7 wonders of the natural world and the only living thing on Earth visible from outer space. This is why the coalition's inaction when it comes to the Great Barrier Reef is quite astounding. In 2005, when I was the Shadow Minister for the Environment, I said this: "The Great Barrier Reef is in danger of disappearing over the next 50 years. But we have a government that's frozen in time while the world warms around it." Back then, of course, we had a Prime Minister who refused to ratify the Kyoto Protocol, who was talking about climate change as being sceptical about the science. When Malcolm Turnbull assumed the Prime Ministership after the assassination of the elected Prime Minister, the member for Warringah, Australians were entitled to expect a different policy on climate change, given the long-held views that the member for Wentworth had held, apparently, though he was prepared to trade in all of that conviction for the keys to the lodge. And that is indeed very problematic, not just for the chaos that the government finds itself in, but more importantly, the policy repercussions of the caving in of the member for Wentworth in order to secure those keys to the lodge have had real consequences for the government's approach to environmental issues. Now, the coalition has been given an opportunity to address the challenge of looking after the Great Barrier Reef and climate change. but it has failed dismally with each opportunity. Earlier this year, the independent expert panel, led by former Chief Scientist Ian Chubb, recommended an urgent revision of the Reef 2050 plan to enable mitigation, adaptation and management of the reef in the face of inexorable global warming. The simple fact is that if Australia and the world don't keep global temperatures in line with our commitments under the Paris Agreement, the reef will continue to deteriorate. In the last 18 months alone, the reef has suffered two unprecedented bleaching events. Irrefutable climate change occurring right in front of us. And despite these events, under the coalition government, carbon emissions rose by 1.4% in the last year. Of course, we had seen those emissions decline when Labor was in government, but we've seen that reverse. And what's worse is that we've seen not just it reverse, but also the impact on energy prices, with a doubling of wholesale power prices since the abolition of the price on carbon, in spite of the very clear commitments that were given by the coalition. Indeed, the government's own emissions projections show that Australia will not even come close to meeting our obligations under the Paris Agreement because of their failure to take adequate action. It's more than the experts too who are severely worried about climate change impacts on the Great Barrier Reef. The recently released Climate of the Nation survey showed that 74% of Australians have a high level of concern about climate change causing damage to the Great Barrier Reef. But still, it seems the coalition has a general willingness to sacrifice our natural environment. This is made evident by their attempts to give environmental powers over issues of national importance to the states, as well as sustain budget cuts to environmental programs since coming to power. Earlier tonight I was at the ARENA showcase. ARENA, of course, an organisation that the coalition government wanted to abolish all funding for, but now they're prepared to go along. And the Minister for Energy giving a speech at the showcase, probably as I'm on my feet now, at the same time to a body in which he believed that it should be abolished and voted for it earlier on. The Prime Minister must be prepared to stand up to the troglodytes in his own party, Mr Deputy Speaker. He must be prepared to do that. And you, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, would know full well why that is so important for the Prime Minister to do just that, because at the moment he's pleasing no one. The Neanderthals in the coalition who don't believe the science of climate change aren't giving him any support, and he's losing support from people in mainstream Australia who just understand that they've got to respect the science and take action. The fact is that the internals of the Liberal Party room keep winning out over the Australian people and the natural environment time and time again. And instead, in an act of which the reasoning behind it is beyond my comprehension, the government last month revealed its plans to wind back protections in our oceans. Now, no government anywhere else in the world has ever removed this many hectares out of conservation before. What we've seen throughout history, in the end of the last century in particular, and the beginning of this century, is a greater awareness that humankind must live in harmony with our natural environment, not in conflict with it, and an understanding that we had a responsibility to future generations to protect that natural environment. And yet this government seems determined to reduce the protection of the oceans around our coastline as an island continent. And to make matters worse, the Turnbull government plans to destroy Australia's shipping industry and turn the Australian coast into a free-for-all, whereby, as much as it talks about national security, it's prepared to have foreign workers without proper security vetting, working on foreign wages around our coasts, taking the jobs of the Australian workforce. And that has real consequences for the environment as well. The truth is that every single incident around our coast which has led to environmental disaster has been a foreign flag vessel. The Shenyang one in 2010 was a ship more than 10 kilometres outside of the shipping lane when it struck the Great Barrier Reef late on the afternoon of 3rd of April 2010. It scraped along the reef, causing damage for a considerable length, the longest known grounding scar on the reef, approximately 3 kilometres long and 250 metres wide. Why did that happen? Because the captain of the ship simply forgot to turn through the channel. He wasn't familiar with it, he was overworked and hadn't had proper rest, and the consequences of that were damage for our reef. Some of the damaged areas have become completely devoid of marine life, and it will take up to 20 years for this section of the reef to return to the state that it was in prior to the incident. By the 13th of April, oil tar balls were washing up on the beaches of North West Island, a significant bird rookery and turtle nesting colony. All up, the spill killed over 400 different species of animals and over 500 different species of plants. The subsequent investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau concluded that the grounding of the ship was caused by human error. Indeed, they found that the chief officer, who was officer of the watch at the time, had neglected to program a required course change in the ship's GPS navigation system due to fatigue. It's just one of the reasons why we simply can't take shortcuts when it comes to protecting the Great Barrier Reef. We in this place have a real responsibility, and it should be, frankly, it should be a bipartisan issue, because we know how critical it is. We on this side of the House have announced our Great Barrier Reef Plan, which involves more coordinated and efficient long-term management of the reef that is appropriately funded and resourced. It includes investment of up to $100 million to review and improve current management practices in the reef in consultation with relevant stakeholders. It is further supported by our Climate Change Action Plan. Labor will also double the number of Indigenous rangers in the Working on Country program, of which a number of projects are in reef catchment areas. Our doubling of rangers includes the Specialised Indigenous Ranger program, which aims to improve marine conservation, particularly for dugongs and turtles along the far north Queensland coast. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I can't convince those opposite about the environment, surely the economic benefit of the Great Barrier Reef should convince them, because the Deloitte Access Economics study, at what price, the economic, social and icon value of the Great Barrier Reef, found this: the reef is worth $56 billion in economic, social and icon terms. It supports 64,000 jobs. These jobs are mainly tourism related, but the reef also supports fishing, recreation and scientific activities. It contributes some $6.4 billion a year to the national economy. That's every single year. In my time as the Shadow Minister for Tourism, I've held a number of roundtables and meetings in far north Queensland on these issues. Most recently, I met with representatives from citizens of the Great Barrier Reef, a new initiative designed to engage the world to support positive action and address climate change through a focus on preserving the World Heritage listed Great Barrier Reef. They're working closely with Tourism Tropical North Queensland, showing that if everyone works together, the outcomes can be maximised. So that is absolutely critical for the tourism sector. In conclusion, can I say that Labor is committed to working with environmental groups, the tourism sector and experts to ensure that the reef receives the protection that it deserves and it needs. You only look at what we've done to show that we've shown our conviction on these matters, and that is why we have a responsibility to future generations.